Today I'm going to talk about determining files and folders accessed in OS X. So this is something that people who do Windows forensics take for granted. You have the link files in Windows, you've got shell bags, you've got recently used entries in the registry. But in OS X, we haven't had much success with having a lot of tracking. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to run down how many here use OS X. Okay, well I'm probably going to run through this a little quicker than I normally would. I'm going to talk about the graphical user interface and some of the terms I'm going to use throughout the presentation. And that's just to set up for how these artifacts are created, so everyone understands what we're talking about. I'm going to do a quick talk about analysis tools, not too long. Then we're going to actually talk about this database, where it is, how we identify it. We're going to go through the structure a little bit, some analysis. I'm going to show you a couple of my test cases that I use to figure out what is getting stored in this database. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the cases I've used this on. So the graphical user interface, I'm going to talk about Finder, viewing the file information, what Quick Look is, and the docs and stacks. Because these are parts of the graphical user interface in OS X that are going to contribute data to this database, or not. I'm just going to let you in on a secret. Quick Look is up here because the database is called Quick Look Thumbnail Cache, but Quick Look actually has nothing to do with it, except the fact that when they introduced Quick Look into the operating system, they started making this database. But it's really just tracking Finder activities. So this is Finder. If you've used OS X, when you open up a new file or folder, this is what you're going to see. A folder with some icons for the files in the folder. It defaults to icon view automatically. You open a new volume, it's going to default back to icon view. That's kind of how OS X works. What you see here is pictures. I used pictures for the research. I will tell you that other file types, media files like movies, Word documents, PDF files, they will put entries in the database depending on the view. So we'll get to that a little later. But for visual purposes, we have beautiful pictures. This is list view, just another view for Finder. If you notice down here at the bottom, you still see these little custom icons are created for the files in the folders. Now we have column view. What's interesting about column view is not only do you have the little icons created for all of the files, but you can actually highlight a file, and the operating system creates this bigger picture of the file for you, a little preview over there on the right-hand side. Cover flow, everyone's favorite. We got this after the iTunes, I think it was, one of the updates. Everyone needed to see everything in cover flow. So you can go through your files and folders in cover flow. Again, you have the icons at the bottoms, and then you're going to have a bigger representation of the file above. So that's your Finder view options. If you right-click on a file in Finder or on the desktop, and you say View File Information, it's going to show you the file information. But one thing it does when it does that is it creates this preview of the file. So the question in my research was, these previews are creating entries in a database, but which of these previews is doing it? So here's a preview that the operating system's created. We're going to find out if it puts it in the database. Quick Look, push the space bar when you have something highlighted in Finder, and it creates this Quick Look screen. If it's a movie, it's actually going to play the movie for you. If it's a picture, it makes it bigger. If it's a Word document, you can actually scroll through PowerPoint presentations, PDFs. Quick Look is just an application so you can quickly look at what's in the file. Your docs and stacks. Your docs is on the bottom of your screen, and over here on the right-hand side is your stacks that they put in the operating system down here. Well, these create little custom icons when you open them up. And if you have a whole bunch of stuff in the folder, this is what it looks like when you click on your stack. It stacks it up on the desktop. So again, just another way that the operating system is creating icons for you. So what gets stored in the database? So generally speaking, if you as a user can see a custom icon for an entry, then there's an entry in the Quick Look Thumbnail Cache database. There are instances, and it's not very scientific. Sometimes OS 10 just doesn't put an entry in the database. Why? I don't know. It just doesn't. There's also some files that it sometimes won't create a custom icon for. Not because there's something wrong with the file. You can open the file, it's fine. But occasionally, the operating system seems to hiccup in one of its processes, and we don't always see a custom icon. So if it doesn't create an icon, you don't see an entry. Files on the desktop, they're viewed as icons, so they should have entries in your database. Files and folders on the dock will have entries in the database. And whenever a folder is viewed in Finder, custom thumbnails are created, so you're going to have an entry in this database. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. I put a CD into my OS 10 system. I open it up. My CD is labeled shoes, because I like shoes. Shoes are nice. When you open it up, it goes to icon view, creates these little custom icons, and when I do that, suddenly there are entries for each of these files in this quick look thumbnail cache database. Now this becomes very important as an investigator or anyone doing analysis, because what just happened here? Okay, I have a subject that says, oh, that CD-ROM, I never put it in my computer. I didn't look at any of the files on it. That external hard drive, I didn't look at any of those files on my computer. That's not mine. What this does is it's creating a record for us so we can see what the user was doing in Finder, what files they're looking at by putting these entries in this database. It's actually tracking user actions. As the user is accessing files and folders, entries are being put in this database. Caveats. There are some actions that don't result in an update to the database. And I showed these to you previously. The reason I showed you is to let you know. So when you do the file previews in column view, it makes the big preview on the right side. That doesn't update the database. Viewing the file information with the big preview at the bottom of the file information, that's not going to update the database. And interestingly enough, opening a file in Quick Look doesn't update the Quick Look thumbnail cache database. So that's why you don't see Quick Look in the title of this presentation, okay? Because the database has a lot of good information, but it has nothing to do with Quick Look. Okay, so let's talk about where we can find this, how you can determine the account owner for the database, and go through some of the information stored in the database. So to talk about tools, everyone uses whatever forensic tool they like. This is a database. It's a SQLite database. Whatever SQLite tool you're using is going to see the information. Little cautionary note, one of the fields is a binary plist. If the tool you're using isn't able to grab the hex out of that column so that you can rename it to plist format and open with some plist viewer, or if the tool you're using doesn't have built-in capabilities to look at binary plist in SQLite, you're going to have to do some more manual processing. I'll show you what I mean when we get there, but just keep that in mind. You've got some binary plist stuff going on, so when you're choosing tools, make sure you can see all of the information in the database. Okay, so where is the Quick Look thumbnail cache database? Oh, it's getting long to say. Okay, so all this stuff is stored in the Darwin user cache, which is private var folders, 2 random characters, followed by 30 random characters, followed by C in 10.7 and newer. That's in 10.5 and 10.6, it was in a different location. I put that path up there. But it's private var folders, random characters, essentially. And then you'll find a folder called com.apple.quicklook thumbnail cache, and inside is your file index.sqlite. And that index.sqlite is the file we are interested in looking at. What's so great about this location? How many people see their private var folder by default? Yeah, I don't either. A lot of users don't know it's here. An interesting thing about OS 10, it doesn't always delete this location for deleted user accounts. So, I'll talk about a case later. We'll get back to that point. Okay. So this is just going through the file structure, showing you see the 2 lettered folders, followed by these really long random characters, followed by C, and then your com.apple.quicklook.thumbnail cache, and then there's your index.sqlite. Separate folder for each user on the system, so user activities are tracked per user. So it's not, oh, my husband must have done that on his account. No, each user profile gets their own. Okay, so how do we know which of these folders belongs to which user account? We have to associate the user ID to the folder. Because private var folders is a system area, right? That doesn't belong to any one user. Every user's got a folder in there. What's the problem with using user ID in OS 10? When the accounts get deleted, I have an account on my system, it's account 501. Later I decide I'm going to give this computer away. I delete my account, I make a new user. Someone comes along, makes another new user later. The point is OS 10 can reuse those user IDs. Now, it's never going to, no, it will reuse I have seen it reuse 501. Generally, the rule is it takes the next available number and uses it. So the point is, you may have multiple folders that are associated with the same user ID if a user has deleted an account, if an account's been deleted on the system. This doesn't change things. You should still be able to figure out kind of what's going on, and I'll show you how we can do that. So how do we know which folder belongs to who? If you go to the 2-letter folder name level, private var folders, 2 letters. If you look at the owner of that folder, it's always going to be the root system. Down here at the bottom, it says BSD owner ID 0. That's the root. That's the system owning the file. You actually have to go down to the next level with the 30 random characters, and then you'll see the BSD owner ID is 501. Now, this is how my tool is showing me the owner of the folder. Different forensic tools will have a different nomenclature for the owner of the folder. So, but however your tool does it, you need to go to this 30 random character folder to figure out which folder belongs to which user account. Tools I used Blacklight. If you haven't used it, it does a nice job with Mac stuff. Some of my coworkers, they love Encase. They use Encase for everything. So when they go through their quick look thumbnail cache database, they use Encase in their own. Whatever tool you're using, it's a SQLite database. It's got some binary plist data in there, whatever makes you happy. I use Excel and Access to go through the data because I like to have sort capabilities. So what I'm going to do is look at the database in the tool, then I'm going to export everything out and be able to search it, sort it, etc. in Access or Excel or whatever spreadsheet tool makes you happy. Time conversions, we're going to do some time conversions later. Epoch Converter version 1.1 does a nice job. Personally, I just put the conversion formula in Excel because that seems a lot easier, but time conversions are something you need to do during this process, but however you do that is cool. Okay, so now we're getting to the structure of the database. There's lots of tables in it, but we're going to concentrate on the files table and the thumbnails table, because these are 2 of the most interesting tables. And look, I made them pink. So here's all of the 5 tables you're going to see in the database. Again, we're going to concentrate on files and thumbnails because that's where the information of interest is located. So your files table has these fields: a row ID, a folder, a file name, an FS ID, and a version. So your row ID, this is an important field in the files table because this is the field we're going to use to link the information in the thumbnails table. Another thing is it makes consecutive entries. So how is that helpful? Because if you're trying to see a pattern of user behavior, for instance, I have a theory that a user went and downloaded stuff via Safari, and then they went to their downloads folder, and then they moved those files to an external hard drive, and then they burnt them to a CD. This database is kept in order, so I should be able to see the activity in order that it happened, right? So I'm going to see first he's in his download folder, then I'm going to see next, they're placed on this external hard drive. So that actually is helpful when you're trying to figure a pattern of behavior. The folder field gives you the full path of where they're accessing on the media. It's OS 10, so whenever you're dealing with media that's not the operating system volume, it's going to start with the path volumes. One of my first cases with this, the reason I was using this and relying on this database was we had data on an external hard drive. And the subject was claiming that they didn't know that wasn't their data. They didn't look at those hard drives. Anyone could have put this stuff on there. It was in his bag, whatever. But going to this database, I could clearly see how the user account on his laptop that's password protected was used to access these external hard drives. And I could quickly sort stuff by volumes and figure that out. Your file system ID field is an interesting one. So maybe someone can help me figure this out someday. The first part after file ID equals is a number right here. My pointer's not very good. Before the dot, there's a number. And that should be a unique identifier for each volume. Now, someone goes, how does that unique identifier create it? And the answer is, I don't know. My inclination, my natural gut feeling is it kind of uses a created date possibly in the volume header or the header information of the volume. But I haven't figured out how OS X is doing it. I just do know that whenever I see one volume, and it's the same volume over and over, that number is the same for all the files on the volume. After the dot is actually more useful. After the dot gives you the seed and number for the file. Okay? Now, some people don't like to deal with CNIDs because it makes them uncomfortable and takes them to a scary place. Whenever you're you're doing analysis on HFS Plus or HFSX, these CNID numbers are literally a beautiful thing. Couple things. Generally, they're not reused. Sometimes if the system's been used a lot, I have had cases, volume header puts up a flag and says, yeah, I'm reusing CNIDs. But for the most part, they're not reused, which means each file on the system has a unique catalog node ID. The second thing, they're allocated in order. How is that helpful? Because I can do a sort on my whole volume with the CNIDs in order and look at a kind of a timeline of activity. Famous case, I'm sure you've heard of it. Someone was doing a death investigation and, someone's dead, not alive. They look on the computer and they see all this activity and they see a suicide node being created. And then after the person dies later, there's edits to the suicide node or something. Anyway, the point is they used to see the number to figure out that someone was really killed the person and was trying to make the suicide node look real. That's the point. So catalog node ID is important. It's helpful here with this database because when you move a file in OS X on the same volume, guess what doesn't get changed? That catalog node ID. So while my folder name may change and even my file name may change, if I'm looking at that catalog node ID and it's on the same volume, I can say, hey, look, that's the same file because even though the user renamed it or even though the user moved it to a new folder, this database is showing me that that's the same file. That catalog node ID shows the movement of that file through the system. And the last field is, this is the one that's stored in a binary format, binary plist format. This is actually going to give you information about the file itself that it's recording. So it's telling you, I'm going to tell you later apparently. Okay, let's look at this files table. So this is the SQLite database. Really pretty, isn't it? You have your row ID. You have your folder. I blacked out the username. Sorry, people don't want their usernames out there. And you can see all of this black stuff can be helpful in identifying whose quick look cache database this is, especially if it's a deleted account, right? So let's say there's no accounts on the system with the number 502, and this is the 502 database. But the username in there says, Laurie. Well, guess what? The suspect's wife may be named Laurie, and this could have been her deleted profile. Someone had gone in and deleted it. So that can sometimes help you in a case. This is the desktop. It's showing you some pictures that were on there. At the bottom here, you see volumes. That's an external drive. Here's another picture, another sample. Oh, wait, 1 second. So you see here in the version field, it says view plist. The tool I'm using allows me to just click that button, and it's going to parse the plist for me. A lot of tools don't do that automatically, but that's one of the reasons I use Blacklight, because it does that automatically. But However you want to get that information out, we're going to look at it later. Here's another sample files table, and I put this up here because anyone who deals with OS 10, you realize that OS 10 is constantly mounting stuff in that volume point. So just because I showed you a CD previously with shoes, volume shoes, this data set actually has a couple other things. The volumes data sets folder, that was actually a network connected hard drive. So if you're dealing in an enterprise environment and you want to know if someone's connecting to a folder on a share or a server and getting data off, that's going to be recorded by this. And then the volume shared, that shared volume was actually a thumb drive that I used to transfer information between my Mac and my PC. So thumb drives get put on here. There's a couple other things that this data set doesn't show that you're going to see, though. When you download stuff, applications like Firefox from the internet, it's going to come in your nice little DMG. You mount the DMG, you're going to see volumes, you're going to see that mounted. So anything that's mounted is going to get its own volume mount point, and you could see entries for it potentially here in the database. Okay, so here's the version field. When you open it up, this is what it looks like. It's got a date in there with a date. It's got a generation, which is telling you the version of QuickLook that generated this. That's not really important that I've noticed. And then it has the size, and that's actually the size of the file of this entry. So now I've got a folder name, I've got a file name, I've got the last modified date and time of that file, and I've got a size for that file. So that's a lot of information about a file. And if that file's no longer there anymore, I also have the seeded number. So these are all this. I've got 5 data points for files that may have been deleted, and that's a lot to go on sometimes. This is how it relates to the actual file. I kind of did a fun little arrow drawing. Okay, so your date is stored in the number of seconds since January 1st, 2001. Once you convert it, you're going to see that that corresponds to that modified date and time of the file. This is just me showing the information of that file on the CD. And you can see that that size is correlating to the size of the file. So that's what this version field is storing. Why does it store it? Good question. Okay, so let's say this is, well, it's a picture. If I open up this picture and I start editing the picture, it's going to update the modified date and time and possibly the size. QuickLook is using this information in the version field to figure out whether it needs to store a new thumbnail. So that's why it's tracking it. It's doing it so it says, hey, do I have to do more work? But as a forensic investigator, this is helpful because I can relate this to the actual file that I'm looking at, right? I can say, is this entry for the same file? Well, it's got the same size, the same date, same name, etc. Second table we're going to look at is the thumbnails table. So the thumbnails table is going to record the size of the thumbnails generated, which may indicate to us which Finder view they were using. There's a file. There's an entry in this table that lets us link into the file ID information. It also has the last hit date, so the last time that the thumbnail was viewed. That could be useful, right? So it says, hey, I didn't look at that. I haven't opened that folder in 3 years, and here's your last hit date of last week. Total number of times the thumbnail was shown, a hit count. And if there are multiple entries, we can possibly see if multiple Finder views were used. We can definitely see if cover flow was used, but we don't know anything about QuickLook. So here are the fields. You have your file ID, the size of the thumbnail. Your icon mode field, this is going to show you if it's cover flow, it has a different number in the icon mode field. Your hit counts, the last hit date and time, and then it's got a bunch of other fields like width, height, and it's got a ton of other stuff that's just not useful, but maybe someday will be. So I took some test data and I said, okay, so what's putting stuff in this thumbnails database? And here's kind of the results. When you're in Finder, if your Finder views an icon view, you're going to have one entry, and your thumbnail size is going to be between 48 and 64. So I didn't show you a table yet. Okay. So when I look at my table, if I see an entry and my thumbnail size is between 48 and 64, I can say, oh, that was an icon view. That's how the user saw it. List and column and cover flow all make the 16 size thumbnail. Cover flow also makes a second entry something bigger in this thumbnails table. So here's our thumbnails table. Your file ID, we got to use that first column to link it back to the information in the files table. So that's how I'm going to figure out what file that 3195 is to. What does that correlate to? Right here I see two sizes that are highlighted in blue. One, it's 48 and 16. So what does that tell me? The user looked at it in icon view and some other view. List or column. Not cover flow, because when I look at that icon mode column, it says 1 for each of them. So cover flow was not used. You see your hit count. For one of them it's 11. For one of them it's 1. And then it's got that date of when it last hit that date. So you can see how this could possibly be useful. The user is continuously going to a folder and looking at the files in it, continuously accessing that folder, especially when they're denying knowledge of it. Having a hit count that's greater than 1 could be helpful. Multiple entries in the thumbnails table just means different thumbnails were generated. You're looking at the folder in different Finder views, or your icon thumbnail size has changed. Here's how you change your icon size. Just a side point, not really that important. Okay, so how do we analyze this? Just going to give you my thoughts on this. Obviously, we all think differently, so when you actually look at this data, you may have a different path that you run down. First thing is your files table can grow excessively large. I've seen one that has over 200,000 entries in it. So it had a lot of data in it about the user activity. So being able to get the data into something that was sortable was helpful. It's providing a historical look at things, the volumes that were mounted, and it will contain information about files that are no longer on the system. Very helpful. The thumbnails table. Typically, I'm going to say typically, does not contain as much data. I have seen instances recently, and it's probably because it's a pretty new computer, the user account wasn't used a lot. But the thumbnails table had a little bit more information than the files, but that's because the user was changing the views. But typically, the thumbnails table is not going to store as much information. It gets overwritten quicker. I've tried to figure out the exact number of entries that get saved in it, and I've had no such luck with that yet. But you're going to see stuff in the files table that aren't going to have entries in the thumbnails table. It's just going to happen. Okay. I talked about that version field, and I talked about those CNID numbers in the files table. Kind of how I approach things is if I can use that CNID to link an entry to a file in the system, that's where I'm going to go first. Because it's quick, it's easy. I can say, that's the file I think it is. Oh, and out here in my system, that's the file with the same CNID. I'm going to say, yep, that's an entry for that file, and here's the information about it, when it was looked at, the number of times it was hit, etc. If the CNID is not available, why would the CNID not be available? Well, if it's a different file system, someone has a fat thumb drive or an external hard drive with FAT32, I have to resort to other information to say, hey, yes, that's that file. And then I'm going to go to the version field and use things like the file size and the modified date. If there's an entry in thumbnails, great, that information goes in. If not, I'm going to just rely on the information in files. So my first steps usually is just to export all of the information out of SQLite into something more manageable for me. That's Excel or Access. And then I'm going to use my sort and search features to look for information of interest. Could be things like file names. It could be stuff I've already identified, paths I've already identified. Perhaps, you're looking at a fraud case and you think the person has copied data off the system. Then I'm going to concentrate on those externally mounted volumes. So depending on what you're doing, depends on how you're going to go through that. Then I'm going to take the thumbnails and I'm going to link them together. Okay. Just want to reiterate that CNID is really useful is when a user starts moving files around. So here was the case. I had a user, put something in he was downloading stuff from some file sharing service, and then he would copy it to his external hard drive, and then he would take that file and put it in the recycle bin, and I could look at the information in the file NIDs in the files table, and I could see that CNID in the folder, and then it got moved to an external drive, so it doesn't have the same CNID. But that one with the CNID that I can track, but I have an entry over here for this one, that goes into the recycle, into the trash bin. Sorry, trash. But the nice thing is that, using the information in that CNID and the version field, I can say, hey, look, that's the same file name with the same version and the same date, and here's how it's moving around. And when I testified to this at a trial, that was very poignant evidence for the members to consider, because the file's no longer on the system. He emptied the trash. But being able to say, yes, that file that we're looking at here, that is the file that he downloaded on this date and it was in this folder, and that he moved to the trash and he eventually emptied to the trash after he moved it to this external. Okay. Version field, remember, binary plist. Modified date and time has to be converted. If you have a tool that'll look at this binary plist, that's very helpful. Here's showing you how you click it. You click View plist, and there's the information. It's like magic. Okay. Here's your date for converting. I'm sure you've converted timestamps before, but I usually put it in my presentation because when I give it to coworkers, they'll always go, hey, how do you convert that date in Excel again? So I just put it in here so people just have it. Simple, seconds, the time since January 1st, 2001. And you can even make it a custom date format in Excel. Okay, this is just quick showing, if you're using a tool like Epoch Time Converter, does the same sort of thing. Decode does the same sort of thing, whatever time conversion you want to use. So here is information from files. You're going to notice that always at row ID 1, you're always going to see the same thing. Okay, so this was a new user account I created on the system. And the first entry on every one of these I've ever seen is always about downloads.lpdf. And that's because it's on your stack, on your dock. And so when you log into the system, that entry gets made. And then after that, I put a couple CDs in there, and this information was created. You can see that it's two different CDs because the volume names are different, and because in that file system ID, you see a different number before the dot for each of these files. Put the date and the last hit date, convert it, convert the information. Then we're going to match the records with file ID and row ID. Now I'm just going to walk you through how I observed and determined what was creating entries. So this is kind of my test procedure. And the reason why I put this information in is because I know I'm telling you how these entries are made, but I have believability issues. So oftentimes I don't trust other people. No offense or anything, but I'm more of a seeing is believing type person. So I'm going to tell you what I did, because you may look at that and go, well, she's stupid and forgot to do something. But I'm just going to tell you what I did and how I came to my conclusions, and then maybe you can look at it later and say, oh, I want to repeat that to make sure she's right. Or you can look at this and say, okay, I'm going to trust her, whatever you want to do. Just going to tell you what I did. I created a new user account. I performed actions, and as I was doing it, I wrote down on pen and paper, I know, crazy, what I was doing it, when I was doing it. And then I looked at this index.SQLite database and said, okay, that action caused this entry to be made. Looking at it in Quick Look made no observable entry, so now I know that Quick Look has nothing to do with this database. I made 2 CDs. CDs are just, they're static media, so that's why I use them. One was named shoes, one was named pictured. I put some JPEGs on the root of shoes. In the pictures, I made some folders with JPEGs inside of them. Okay, so this is the resulting information. It's hard to see, but we'll get through it. Okay, so I put the CD pictures in. changed it to list view, and I open up the photos directory. And here I get 4 entries. That's the 4 files that was in the folder. Then I changed it to column view and navigated to the Monet folder. Notice I changed to column view, but we didn't get additional entries up there for the photos folder. The reason we didn't is because column view and list view use the same size icon, so it didn't need to make a new icon. So that change didn't get tracked. Then the next thing I did was I changed it to, I highlighted that one picture in the column view, to make the big one on the side, but nothing happened. So nothing is circled because it didn't do anything. Then I changed to cover flow. How do I know it's cover flow? Looking at that icon mode column, it says 0, so that means cover flow. If you look at those widths and heights, they're very different. Question is, how come you don't see the 16 entries along with these? The reason that you don't is because just above it, it was in a different view. So typically with cover flow, I would expect to see 2 entries in a row. That's just if I change to the folder and it's already in cover flow. Since I was already in the folder and already created those 16 by 16th icons, it didn't have to do it again, so it's just creating the cover flow ones now. OS X's not doing extra work. It doesn't want to. See, the next folder I go to, you see 0101. That's OS X. When it first got to the folder, it said, hey, I don't have any of the little icons, so I need to make those for this folder. And I'm going to make the cover flow, so I see 2 entries. Does that make sense? Okay, just think it through. Get back to me. The last thing I did was I opened the other CD, the shoes folder. It defaults to icon view, and so those are the entries that you're going to see there. It's the icon view, 48 by 48. Okay, so these were the observations I made. Highlighting that file in the column view to make the big picture, nothing happened. You may not have noticed, but when you look at the data closely, you will. A record was created for 4 out of the 5 files in the volumes pictures Monet directory. All 5 images were reserved in cover flow, but for some reason OS X did not make a picture, did not make a thumbnail, did not record it in the database. No, I don't know why it didn't. I observed this glitch a couple times, not necessarily with this file, but sometimes that happens. So it's not always, 100% reliable. But if there is an entry there, it did make a thumbnail. You'll notice there was no entries for the choose folder, which I told you was on that CD, but you probably forgot because it wasn't that important. I didn't navigate to that folder, so the folder was there on the CD. The CD didn't change, but I didn't see any entries for it because I didn't open it, so OS X didn't need to make icons, so it didn't. So OS X is not going through and making icons for everything on a volume. The user has to do something in order to make these icons. That's why I didn't go to that folder. I did some additional testing about this hit count field because you see the numbers in the hit count. They're all 1 here, but I did some additional testing, went to the folders multiple times, and it's not always reliable. For the files in the same folder, it would have like 11 for most of them, but a couple of the files it would say 12. So the hit count is not like 100%. Yes, the user went there that many times. It could be the user went there at least that many times. It's a better statement. Okay, so talked about a couple cases. One thing I did want to, this is just some theory stuff. Obviously, I see that, intellectual theft, this could be useful. Person can access removable media, and they copy files to it. That could be important to a company or an organization. This is how I've used it. Files of interest are located on the external media. The user account used to access that external media can be determined. Just came back from a case. I was on trial. The wife had an OS X system. The husband had a Windows system. All of the files are found on these external hard drives that took from the husband. So it comes time. The defense attorney gets up there, and they're like, oh, did you know his wife liked to watch pornography? Okay. Not my business. But if you say so, well, isn't it possible that these were her files made on her computer? No, because that hard drive, that external hard drive, was not connected to her computer. Oh, it's in the Quick Look thumbnail cache database. And if she had connected that volume to that operating system, I would have seen it. And I did not see it, so she didn't do it. But I did see on his computer where he connected that drive to Windows, and here are the link files. So that's how it can be helpful. Another case, user deleted files and folders. So a person in California was singled out because they were downloading lots of illicit files. I think they were the number 2 downloader in their county, so that's a goal. Not quite number 1. We get the system. There's no files on it. I see some deleted files that have names that are possibly suspect. So I start looking at his computers. There's a laptop he's got. The laptop has one user account. It has his sister's name on it. Now, he's away at college in California. His sister lives in the Midwest somewhere. I was like, that is so weird. Doesn't, weird. So I go look at the quick look thumbnail cache database. What do I find? I find one for a user account on that laptop that had his name. Shocking. And in that database was a list of all of these files, file names, that were kind of suspect to me because the names had things in it that were probably not very nice. So that was very helpful because he didn't know that this quick look thumbnail cache database was there. He didn't know it was tracking the names of the files he was downloading. And all of that information was there for me to read. And not only that, but I could corroborate what the investigator said, that, hey, downloading was happening on these dates. Well, guess what? These entries in this quick look thumbnail cache database, they had a modified time in there, in that version field. So I could say, hey, this is when these files finished downloading, because those modified times are when it made it to the system. If you're talking about shared folders, you can see multiple user accounts, which user account was doing what. These are account-specific things. So, okay, I talked about this first case where I looked at the CNID number and saw the information moving around. I've used the thumbnails table to confirm that not only did the user access the folder, but they saw those thumbnail pictures, especially in, sometimes we have to say, not only does the person have this file, but I know that they've seen it. And especially with pictures, that's easy with this because I can say, yeah, a thumbnail was created. This is when they opened the folder. They saw a picture. They saw the picture there. I can see it. And guess what? Guess what, members of the jury? Here's a little screenshot of what that would look like to the user of this system. Because we can all make screenshots of what things look like, the icon view of a folder. That's easy to do. So that was very helpful. The other thing to remember, private var folders, users don't know where this is a lot of times. They don't know that this database is tracking what they're doing, and they don't get rid of it. So finding those for the deleted accounts can be very illuminating about this information that was on the system and the activities that occurred on the system. Okay. Did I confuse everyone? Yes, questions. Okay. I did not measure that. No. I know it's less than that. Okay, so I had that. I remember I had this idea about changing the. I'll show you a picture because this might help. Someday I'll get there. Okay, so remember I was here and I was like, hey, if you change the size of your icons, it's going to make more entries. So one day I was like, okay, let's see what we can do with that. So I slowly, very slowly scrolled across. I cannot tell you the number. We've made hundreds of entries. So it's doing it very fast because it's reacting to a user. And it actually, for some of them, because I'm a human, I'm not a computer. I know, scary, huh? But as I was scrolling across, I must have paused on a number, so sometimes you would see the hit count go up where I didn't scroll evenly. So those entries are made pretty quickly. Any other questions? Yes? Right, so I've been doing some side research on that, and I had a big, huge spreadsheet of what I've seen as far as the number of entries contained in these databases, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like I looked at my MacBook, one of my MacBooks that I've had since Let's see, my girls were one. I've had it since 2008, and it had, how many files? It had like 20,000 entries in the files table. But then I go to another case that I'm working on, and it's not as old as my computer, but it has 200,000 entries. So I don't know what the differentiator is or how the operating, I haven't seen any pattern or been able to determine that yet. Yes. Oh, it does end up in this database. Yes, it just doesn't, you just won't see that. That CNID number won't mean CNID. It'll mean whatever OS 10 is creating for it. So if you look here, that volume shared folder in green, that's actually a FAT32 thumb drive. But when you get over to that file system ID, if you look after the green, after the dot, it says like 46 and 47. It just, that number doesn't correlate to a CNID anymore. So I have to use other information. So, did that answer it? Yes. Yes. The share that it was connected is called data sets there. Like that's the name of the share that I connected to. No, as far as like the remote server's name, it's just at the mount point. So if I said mount at this folder, it's going to put the folder name where I mounted it. Yes. Yes. I have not. I have not. So that's a good test. Yeah. It could be. Now, to throw a bigger monkey wrench into the equation, I was helping a colleague look at his quick look thumbnail cache database because everybody wants me to look at their database now. It's very naughty. Anyway, sorry. So I go over and he's got, users and then he's got a username. Interestingly enough, at some point in time, that identifier for his OS volume changed. Now, I don't know what happened on the system, whether he did some sort of OS 10 update and it caused it to change, whether he was repairing a file system and it caused it to change. I don't know what happened. My colleague's like, I thought you said this number is going to be the same for the volume, but this is obviously the same internal volume and now it's changed. And I was like, I don't know. Is there any difference between encrypted versus not? So if the entire system's encrypted, this file would be inside the encrypted, so you would expect to see the same number. Now, that is a good theory, though, because he could have at some point encrypted his user profile with file vault 1, and that could account for the change. So I don't have a lot of answers. I just know typically it tends to be the same number. With the CDs, it doesn't change within the file system, but within the same computer. And the internal tends to be the same number, but we did see where he had his, what was it? TrueCrypt container was mounted, and it had this, its own unique number. Yes? So the operating system is very protective of itself. I have been able, while it's running in live, to go in and delete this database, and then it goes away. Like magic, it's gone. And the operating system's okay with that. It will not let me open it from its current location. So I can copy it out of private var folders, big long path, and I can copy it to my desktop and open it up and possibly change it. And I have been able to put it back, and it's okay with that. So yes, you can, but it's not as simple as opening, making some changes, and closing.
But it would be theoretically possible, right? Like, say, create a Python tool that would go in, dump the database, and these tables.
Yes.
If they wanted to.
Yes. Yes. Yosemite, it's still in the Darwin user cache area, same location. So it should be private var folders and then yes. Okay. Oh, that's easier. Any other questions? Okay.